Welcome to week 3 of our One House series, Bible in a Year, that we're all going through together here in 2022. As a reminder, the 52-week outline, including a daily option, is available at cornerstonefv.com. Just go to the Bible in a Year tab, or you can pick it up in print at Cornerstone anytime you want to come by on a Sunday. This week, we are finishing reading the book, the first book of the Bible, Genesis. 3 weeks in Genesis. It's a big book. It's an important book, and I'm glad we get to spend a full 3 weeks in it. This week, we'll be looking at chapters 36 through 50. So far, we've walked through so many foundational stories, from creation to the first entry of sin into the world, to Noah's Ark, to the introduction of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And today, after a couple chapters wrapping up the story of Jacob, we're going to be looking at the first really long-form story of a single individual in Scripture, one of the sons of Jacob named Joseph. Now, before we actually get into Joseph's story, let me remind you really quickly that in addition to picking up a Bible and reading it for yourself, you also have the option of listening to the Bible, depending on what works for you. And some of you may go back and forth week by week. That's perfectly fine. Let me give you a couple places you can go and actually listen to the Bible for free, or you can simply go and buy an audio Bible. That's actually the simplest way to do so if you want to spend a little bit of money on it. But you can do so at BibleStudyTools.com. You can find it there for free. YouVersion app will do it for free. Biblical.com and FaithComesByHearing.com. All of them have free audio Bible options, and we'll put the links to all of that in the show notes for you. Now let's get to the reading for today. The reading for this week. This week begins in chapters 35 and 36. And in those two chapters, we'll be wrapping up the story of Jacob and Esau. And it's really interesting because this is, I think, maybe the third serious sibling rivalry story that we've seen in the Bible. We read it last week, right, with Jacob and Esau. And now we're going to get into an even bigger sibling rivalry story. And of course, we can go back to the sibling rivalry story of Isaac and Ishmael, all the way back to Cain killing Abel. It's one of those amazing things where when the Bible presents the stories of its major characters, because these are people who actually existed and who actually lived real lives, the Bible doesn't shy away from the reality of their lives, both positive and negative. So the story that we've had of this sibling rivalry that we read last week between Jacob and his brother Esau, they have already reconciled. As we begin reading this week, we're going to see Jacob meeting with God at Bethel again. We're going to see a little bit about the descendants of Esau, who from this point on will be called Edom. Remember that name, because later on in Numbers 20, at about week 8, I believe, in fact, it's week 8, we're going to see the Edomites come up again, the longtime descendants of Esau. And it's a pivotal chapter in Numbers chapter 20 that we'll get to in week 8, where this old rivalry between these two half-brothers comes up again and becomes a generations-long struggle between the Israelites and the Edomites. So pay attention to that when we get to it in just the first couple of chapters this week. After that, though, from chapters 37 through 50, we really narrow in on this one character, Joseph, and particularly a story involving his brothers and his father, including at the very beginning of it, especially his mom as well. So what we've seen already is Jacob and Esau. They've had this rivalry, one of multiple sibling rivalries already, as we've said already. And then we've had Abraham and Isaac, both of them who have a very limited number of children. And then we've got Jacob. As we saw last week, he was deceived into having 2 wives. Those 2 wives, again, as we saw last week, had this baby making contest, right? This rivalry that produces a huge array of kids. And of course, if you've got 2 wives who are having a baby making contest and they produce over a dozen boys, not to mention how many girls, that is not a recipe for a peaceful household. And of course, they don't have a peaceful household. In addition to that, one of the youngest of them, Joseph, becomes Dad's favorite. And Dad doesn't hide the fact. In fact, Dad lets everybody know Joseph's my favorite, and he gives him what we know now popularly as the coat of many colors. This is one of those moments that people who don't even know the Bible very well might have heard at least the phrase, the coat of many colors. About 50 years ago, there was a big Broadway play called Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, and occasionally they'll do a revival of that, and it's based on this story. So what is the deal about a father giving his son a coat that happens to have a lot of colors in it? Why is this such a big issue? So the story is going to come, but I'm going to give you the background of the story so you'll understand what's happening when you read it. Back in this era, it was understood that the oldest son was simply going to take over the family leadership when dad died. And the way they did it was by two different things. First of all, imagine if you had 10 kids. Your inheritance to those kids would be divided up into 11 pieces. 10 kids, 11 pieces. The oldest son would get 2 of those pieces, and all of the other sons would get 1 of those pieces. This is what's called the double portion. Remember that phrase? It will come up several times later in Scripture, the double portion. The double portion means, again, let's go over it again. If there are 10 sons, the inheritance is divided into 11 pieces. The oldest son gets 2 of those pieces, which means the oldest son has double the amount of inheritance that his brothers have. And in addition to that, he would be given some symbol that he was going to be the head of the family from that point on. Sometimes it would be a rod and scepter. Sometimes it would be a ring with the family signet on it. In this case, it was a multicolored coat that he would wear everywhere. And whenever he wore it, that would designate, I'm the head of the family. By giving the coat to Joseph before he dies, he signals Joseph, even though he is one of the youngest in the family, is going to be the head of the family when I die. His older brothers hate him for this. They also hate him because he's had a couple dreams that he tells to them, in which it appears that God is saying in advance that your brothers are going to bow down to you. And if you've got a bunch of older brothers and you tell them you're going to serve me one day, that is not going to go well for you. So what do we watch for this week as we take a look at this amazing story? The theme for this week could almost be no good deed goes unpunished, especially for Joseph. God gives Joseph dreams, and because of that, he ends up in slavery. He resists temptation, and because of that, he ends up in jail. He interprets dreams as God gives him the interpretation, and he's forgotten still for years in that jail. And then, in one of the Bible's great story climaxes, he goes from slavery to prison, ultimately to unheard of leadership. His dreams literally come true as he saves his nation and as he saves his family. Maybe I should have said spoiler alert before that, but I don't think it's going to ruin any of the story for you because most of you have read it through already. And if you haven't, that outline won't ruin it for you. It will prepare you for it. It is one of the most touching scenes in all of the Bible when the reconciliation happens. So as you read through, here are a few things to pay attention to this week. First of all, pay attention to how Joseph consistently does the right thing, even when it's difficult. Secondly, pay attention to how Joseph's negative experiences, and he has a lifetime of very negative experiences, how they all add up to prepare him for the job that God finally has for him when he comes into greatness. So that even our negative experiences, in fact, in most of our lives, most of the time, our most negative experiences will be the ones that inform who we're going to be and that become the fuel for whatever God's call has on our life. It's always the negative experiences that end up speaking most strongly and end up being the greatest blessing to others. Thirdly, take a look at how Joseph reacts when he has the chance for vengeance, not just once, but twice with his brothers, and how he reacts positively instead. And above all, take a look at how God designs all of this, all of Joseph's life, in a way that no one could have thought of or asked for. For several years now, I've read and listened to leadership gurus talk about you need to have a plan for your life, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. And I look at a life like Joseph and I go, is there any way that anybody could have even conceived Joseph's life plan in advance? There's no way you could have. When you read it, you go, this is so improbable. You wouldn't tell the story unless it was absolutely true. And I think that's the way it is for a lot of our lives. It doesn't mean we shouldn't plan. It doesn't mean we shouldn't anticipate. It doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for excellence. But it does mean that there are times things are going to happen and we can't despair because we're not in charge of it. God is, and God sees the end from the beginning. So as we see Joseph's life, as we walk with him through the very, very difficult seasons, we see how God uses those difficult seasons to prepare him for greatness, simply because Joseph always does the right thing, and he always responds with obedience. Joseph may be the best picture in the Old Testament of Christ-like behavior. So look for that in him, but most of all, look for God as the hero of Joseph's story. I know you're going to enjoy this as we read this together this week.